You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode, I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today, on the Adiel Gorel Show.
Yeah, now I do believe, and I eat a strict whole food plant-based diet. I personally advise my cancer patients to try to go whole food plant-based. In fact, I just got off the phone with someone that went off of that and they're starting to come out of remission, and I'm like recounseling, because one of the things that you constantly need to do is be educating yourself constantly. It's like with anything.
Hi everybody, it's a joy to be here with you again. Today is very exciting. We get to be on the show with Dr. Dominic Brandy. Dominic, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
So, you're talking about something that generally arouses mixed feelings in people. Nobody wants to talk about the C word. We would rather not hear it, not discuss it. And yet, as you say, and it's known, it's the second leading cause of death after heart disease. So it is something that's kind of a big deal. So, if we can start from zero, what is cancer and why do we get cancer?
Well, in my book, Beat Back Cancer Naturally, I discuss what causes cancer. And one of the big single contributions is really the accumulation of DNA mutations as we age. Every day we get hit with about 19,200 hits to our DNA. Just through normal metabolism, our mitochondria form trillions of free radicals. And for your listeners, free radicals are molecules that have unpaired electrons. If you remember from your chemistry class, electrons don't like to be unpaired. So what they do is they seek out an electron somewhere. And in the process, they damage a lot of your cellular membranes. They'll damage a lot of your DNA, your proteins. So over the course of a single day, studies show you get about 19,200 hits to your DNA. Now, thankfully, we have three innate antioxidants in each one of our cells. We have glutathione peroxidase, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. And they can usually keep a lot of that free radical damage under control. But just the way we live in our society today, we almost all overload our system with free radicals, either with the diet that we're eating, just going outside, the pollution, a lot of the toxins we're exposed to. Smoking is probably the worst way to increase your free radical activity. I read an article one time that just one puff of a cigarette creates 8 hours of free radical activity. So in the course of just living, we get more and more DNA mutations. When I first got diagnosed, and for your listeners that don't know, I was diagnosed with an incurable blood cancer 5.5 years ago called multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of the B cells. It is an incurable cancer. I've been in a complete remission now for over 5 years. But when I first got diagnosed, I read an article in the journal Nature that, I must be quite frank with you, like really upset me. It was written by Mikhail Munchki. He's a famous myeloma researcher. And in that paper, he wrote, by the time you get diagnosed with the kind of cancer I have, you have about 5,000 DNA mutations in that cancer cell. And by the time you relapse, you're up to about 12,000. And a lot of those extra DNA mutations, I believe, come from the chemotherapeutic drugs that the people are taking, but also just the fact that that person is aging. Just normally, they're going to get more and more DNA mutations. So when I do lifestyle counseling for cancer patients, I always try to get them to eat more of a plant-strong diet, because plants have 63 times the antioxidant power compared to animal products. So to neutralize the number of free radicals that are kind of circulating in your bloodstream, if you eat more plant foods, you're going to be able to neutralize more of those free radicals. You're going to have less DNA mutation, which is going to allow somebody, for instance, that's in a remission to stay in a remission.
So when you say plant strong and more plant, how does that fit into the whole picture? In other words, let's say that we have a person not who's not vegan, not vegetarian, and omnivore,
Right.
and you're saying on the spectrum of remaining an omnivore and just increasing the plant content versus starting to ditch some of the animal, can you kind of cover that spectrum quickly from 0 to 100, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, I do believe, and I eat a strict whole food plant based diet. I personally advise my cancer patients to try to go whole food plant based. In fact, I just got off the phone with someone that went off of that and they're starting to come out of remission. And I'm like reconseling because one of the things that you constantly need to do is be educating yourself constantly. It's like with anything. If you know why you're giving up the chicken wings, then you're going to not eat the chicken wings anymore. But when somebody's eating an omnivore diet, and I'm trying to gradually, get them to eat more plant based, a lot of times what I'll tell them to do is, take 4 of your favorite recipes, for example, maybe omnivore recipes that you have, and try to convert them into plant-based recipes. And I don't even mind if they use some of these plant-based substitutes that are out on the market. So take your 4 favorite, make them into 10 plant-based recipes. And then I always say breakfast is probably one of the easiest ways to do that. I mean, one of the healthiest breakfasts, and what I basically have for breakfast just about every morning is I have steel cut oats with 4 different berries. I put cinnamon on there, which in itself has a lot of anti-cancer properties. And then I always use soy milk, and then I just have that every morning. And that is loaded with tons of phytonutrients, but also a lot of soluble fiber, which is the only type of fiber that feeds your gut microbiome. And we're finding more and more that the gut microbiome really is one of the most essential aspects of having good immunity. I mean, when you have a diverse uh, gut microbiome, your immune system, your tumor surveillance is much much better. So that's another reason why I feel that people need to eat more plants, not only for the antioxidant power, but we do know that when you eat more fiber, you have a more diverse, more healthy microbiome. In fact, I don't know if you're familiar with the American Gut Project. It's spearheaded by Dr. Robert Knight in Colorado, and they've analyzed over 10,000 stool samples at this point. And what they found was those that eat 30 or more different plant foods over the course of a week have a much healthier, more diverse microbiome compared to people that eat 10 or less. And the people that ate 10 or less had a lot more antibiotic resistant bacteria also. So it's not only the eating at least, I always tell people at least eat 9 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. That's what the National Cancer Institute recommends for the prevention of cancer. But if you can eat a diversity of these different plant foods, it's important. And that doesn't necessarily mean servings. So if somebody ate a salad with 25 different vegetables in it, I mean, they're almost at 30 different plant foods. Or if they made a bean soup with a bunch of vegetables in it, I mean, there might be 12 different vegetables in there. So I always tell people, listen, if you want to try to get that diversity, make a big salad instead of putting just all lettuce, tomatoes, carrots, and onions. Put like a couple broccoli, a couple cauliflower, put some peas, carrots, corn, put a bunch of different vegetables in there. And then maybe every Sunday, make a nice bean soup, put them in mason jars, and then you can have that throughout the week. Just throw it in the microwave, and then you're good to go.
Okay, so let me drill it down a little bit because I want to come at you from a slightly devil advocate-ish kind of
Hey, go at it. Because
viewpoint, and also to help viewers and listeners who
right,
we don't want to lose based on statements that So
Right.
let's take the chicken wings. So
Okay.
the chicken wings is one thing, but how about free range, real chicken that roams the yard and eats, little, not being fed with all the bad stuff? Where does that fit into that spectrum of, nutrition?
Right. You can look at it from many, many different aspects. First off, let's look at it from IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1. So we know that insulin growth factor 1 is a very potent stimulus of cancer growth. Um, as we age, our insulin growth factor decreases. We need it to become an adult. But remember, I just talked about as we age, we get more and more DNA mutations. So the way God made us is as we get more and more DNA mutations, our stimulus for growth actually goes down because you don't want a stimulus for growth in the environment of increased DNA mutations. So we do know that animal proteins have branched amino acids. They do send a signal to the liver to create IGF-1. So if you look at omnivores compared to vegans, they have much higher IGF-1 levels. I personally, when I'm doing cancer lifestyle coaching, I try to keep people's IGF-1 levels between 120 to 160. Studies do show that you can bring down the IGF-1 levels by 20% in just 11 days just by eating whole food plant-based. So that you can significantly drop the IGF-1 levels. So that's IGF-1. The second thing is mTOR. mTOR is another activator of cancer growth, any kind of growth. And once again, when we're young, our mTOR activity, it's a protein kinase, is very active. As we age, our mTOR activity declines. And one of the primary activators of mTOR is leucine and also cysteine. If you look at foods that are high in leucine, they're all the animal products. They're very low in your plant products. So just looking at growth stimulation right there. And by the way, there's a group of dwarfs in Peru. They're called the Luran dwarfs. I don't know if you ever heard of them before, but they basically have an IGF-1 mutation. They can't make IGF-1. There's never been a reported case of cancer in a Laurent dwarf because they basically don't have any IGF-1. Um, moving down from that, remember that even if it's grass-fed, all animals have their own hormones. Remember, they have their own growth hormone. They have their own testosterone. They have their own estradiol. They have their own estriol. They have their own estrone. So they have their own hormones. So anytime people say that they're eating grass-fed and it's hormone-free, that definitely is not true because you're eating an animal and they have their own hormones. So you're definitely getting those. The other thing is we definitely know that animal products definitely have higher pesticide levels than plant foods because the any toxins that animal is exposed to, they're essentially fat soluble. They will accumulate in the fat tissue. I think most of us know that, for instance, tuna is high in mercury.
Mhm.
Well, if you go down the food chain to the algae, uh, they have a little bit of mercury, but then the anchovies eat the algae. Now they have higher mercury levels, and then the medium-sized fish eat the anchovies and the sardines, and now they have more mercury. And then the tuna eat the medium-sized fish. Now they have the highest level of mercury. So these pesticides and these toxins definitely bioaccumulate in the fat tissue of all animals. And when you look at the pesticide levels in, for instance, vegans, and I hate that word vegan, by the way, because you can be eating Doritos and drinking Coke all day, and you can call yourself a vegan, and that's probably the worst diet you could. I'd rather somebody just eat a carnivore diet than eating Doritos and Coke all day. Um, but the point is that when you are eating more of these animal products, you're definitely getting higher levels of pesticides. And the one study that I was quoting is they measured pesticide levels actually in vegans versus omnivores, and vegans have much lower pesticide blood levels compared to omnivores. The other thing is when you cook meat. I think most people know that when you grill it, you cook it under high heat, they form these heterocycling amines nitrosamines, advanced glycation end products that are very, very carcinogenic. I mean, there's the only way that you can really prepare meat and not develop these toxic products is either you boil it, or studies do show if you heavily marinate these meats with herbs, you can significantly decrease the amount of these heterocyclamines, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, nitrosamines, etc., when you cook the meat. So that's another thing. Now, another aspect, and I've listened to some of your podcasts about saturated fat and cholesterol, and we can get into a whole discussion on that, is that animal products all have fairly high saturated fat levels and cholesterol. And one thing when I'm coaching my cancer patients, I think most people don't realize this, and I think a lot of your audience might be surprised by this, but anywhere from 20 to 40% of cancer patients don't die of cancer. They actually die of a cardiovascular event. So I really try to make sure that my cancer patients really are keeping their cardiovascular health in check. I make sure they have good insulin sensitivity, that their insulin levels aren't jacking up, because that's another very powerful growth stimulator of cancer. Insulin. In fact, insulin is probably more of a powerful growth factor than insulin growth factor 1. So there's a lot of different aspects, but I think it goes all the way from, IGF-1 to mTOR to these heterocyclamines to these pesticides that accumulate in the tissues. And remember, all these animals have their own set of diseases. I mean, they have their own viruses, bacterial infections. They might have cancer. So anytime you're eating animal products, I mean, you're not only dealing with your own disease, but you're dealing with a lot of the diseases that the animal has. And once again, if somebody's 40 years old and they want to be on, I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. But if you do look at the blue zone areas of the world where people live the longest, Icaria, Greece, Sardinia, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, and Loma Linda, which is in the United States. And that's really the area that I always like to focus on because it's our culture. That's where a lot of the Seventh-day Adventists live. They don't drink alcohol. Most of them are vegans or vegetarians. Women live on average about 10 years longer than their American counterparts, and men live about 14 years longer. In all of these areas, when Dan Buettner did his research and wrote his book, The Blue Zones, which is a great book, by the way, he found that these people eat anywhere from 90 to 95% plant-based. So I think there's really a lot of evidence. And when you go through the scientific literature, and trust me, I'm in the scientific literature about 3 to 4 hours every morning. Cultures and research cohort groups that eat more plant-based definitely have much lower incidence of cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, uh, dementia, really all-cause mortality.
At the risk of boring you to tears,
Hey, you can go at it.
I will ask you questions again in the service of the podcast that you are asked a million times. And I know they will be very boring for you, but the answers do make okay. So again, the age-old question about protein and complete protein and how much protein we need and how much protein do you get on the vegan diet, B12, all those classic questions that have been around for decades.
Right.
So again, I'm sorry for boring you, but if
no, it's good that we're going over this because I think it's really important. In fact, I tell you what, I just did a video, and I'm going to be putting it on my Instagram site, Cancer Veggie Doc, probably today or tomorrow. But it's the most fascinating study I have ever read. They basically proved through carbon radioisotope tracing that sucrose, which is simple sugar in cornmeal, if you follow it, the radioactive carbon, all the way down to the gut microbiome, the gut bacteria in your colon, can actually make a high volume of essential amino acids. And when they followed it, they followed it all the way to the essential amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine, etc., going all the way to muscle protein synthesis. I mean, it's one of the most mind-blowing studies I have ever read, and it kind of makes sense. Like I always wondered how apes, who are basically vegan, get all this muscle, and it's probably coming from their gut microbiome. Their gut microbiome is probably providing any essential amino acids that maybe they need to actually create the muscle that they need to be able to carry on their functions. Um, as far as protein, the RDA is zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram. Um, Personally, I've checked my protein intake on a normal day. I mean, I eat about 100 grams of protein. I'm whole food. I don't even try to do that. I don't even want to do that, to be quite honest with you. I mean, it's pretty hard not to eat over that zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram. It's almost impossible. Like when I do my oatmeal in the morning, I've actually calculated how many grams of protein. I mean, there's like 35 grams of protein just with my breakfast. And I'm already in. One thing your viewers need to know is that when you get over 30 to 35 grams of protein in a meal, I mean, your body doesn't even use that. It's just excess. Um, I did a post, it was probably about 2 months ago. And, nothing against Dr. Joe McColl. I think he's a smart guy, but I follow his website. And in the morning, he has a 12-ounce steak and 6 eggs. And I read that. I'm going, man, I wonder like how many calories and how I just like calculated it all. And it was like 1,300 calories. There were like over 1,500 milligrams of cholesterol. There was over 30 grams of saturated fat. There was like over 1,600 milligrams of sodium. And there was a ton of carnitine and choline. We can get into that, how that affects the gut microbiome. But I was just like totally blown away. And there was zero fiber and zero phytonutrients in that meal. And then the next month, he did a post on how he has to bloodlet himself every month to get rid of the excess iron. So it was like I was just scratching my head, when I was reading that, because it was really kind of mind blowing to me, to be quite frank with you, that somebody would eat that for breakfast and think that is a healthy breakfast. And that is a lot of what's going on in social media right now. People are getting very, very confused with a lot of these carnivore diets, keto diets, and so forth. And we can get into that, but a lot of people are going to be damaged by some of these really very ridiculous dietary approaches.
People have been confused throughout. In 1980, 1979 actually, I was in South America traveling. And I was always interested. It's not that I started a podcast yesterday. I was
Yeah.
born interested. So I was carrying a book with me by a nutritionist who was very famous back in the day. I mean, we're talking 40 something years ago. His name was Pavo, Paavo, Irola.
Okay.
And the name of the book was Are You Confused?
Yeah.
That's 1980.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
in the 43 years that passed, I don't think the confusion level went any lower. But again, you talked about protein and how maybe even that study, which does sound fascinating, shows that we can actually make protein in our gut. But what about those questions about B12 and all of those elements?
Yeah. Now, but just protein first before I do the B12. There was a really good study done at the University of Southern California. It was in cell metabolism, and it was an 18-year follow up, and they basically broke the groups into 10% or less total protein, 10 to 20%, and then over 20%. And what they found after 18 years, the people that ate over 20% protein actually had a 74% higher premature mortality rate. And the highest type of mortality was actually cancer. In regard to B12, everybody over 50 should be taking B12 because when you get over 50, you don't even absorb it very well. So really over 50, everybody should be taking B12. And if you are eating a whole food plant-based diet, I have everybody take a B12 supplement. I think everybody also should take a vitamin D supplement, especially if you live up north. Advising a supplementation doesn't necessarily mean that a diet is deficient and so forth. And once again, I don't have a problem with people eating some animal products because remember, in the blue zones, those people eat anywhere from 90, 95% plant-based. So that means they're eating anywhere from 5 to 10% animal products. And when they do eat animal products, it's usually the size of a deck of cards. They might have it maybe once to 4 times a week. It's not the main part of their dish. It's more of a garnish. And that's, in my view, that's what it should be. It should be mainly your vegetables, and your meat should be more of a garnish rather than, you got a big, like in America, you got this big giant steak and there's a little bit of green beans on the side. Um, in fact, there's a survey, it's the Haynes survey, and they found that the average American only eats 1.8 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. And that's counting, believe it or not, French fries and ketchup as a vegetable. So we've kind of gone way off course in the United States, and we eat about 60 to 65% ultra processed food. And I think everybody agrees with that. I don't care if you're paleo, keto, that you really should not be eating that much ultra processed foods. I mean, I think that's where we're running into a lot of our problems with the health of our country.
By the way, the new wave of fake meat, I can't believe it's not meat. It looks like it has blood that's made out of plants. Aren't these ultra processed foods really?
Well, what you have to understand is that processed foods aren't necessarily bad. I mean, when you eat bread, all bread is processed. I eat Ezekiel bread. I think Ezekiel bread is extremely healthy, but it's processed. Obviously, I drink soy milk. That's the kind of milk I drink. I mean, obviously, that's processed. So when you make a bean burger, I mean, you're processing it. So it's the degree of process. I think when I talk about ultra processed foods, I'm talking about things more like potato chips, Doritos, muffins, things like that, with a lot of fat, sugar, and oil in them. I mean, the reason that a lot of these companies put the combination of fat, sugar, and oil in them is they're very addicting. I mean, you normally don't find in nature foods that have high sugar content and high oil content. I mean, you just basically don't find that very often in nature. When you combine that together, I mean, it really kind of triggers dopamine in your brain, and it creates an addictive effect. So a lot of these ultra processed foods are very damaging. In fact, one of the things I always tell people to do at night when they're eating, watching TV. I know my wife and I watch TV. We like to snack, um, and what we found was, and it was on an Instagram site, is if you just take organic popcorn kernels and you put them in a paper bag, and then you put it in the microwave for anywhere from like a minute and a half to 2 minutes. I mean, that makes an amazing popcorn. Then you can spray a little bit of extra virgin olive oil on. We put some nutritional yeast on that, but it's a really nutritional way to snack. I mean, you're actually getting health benefits, and then it's kind of giving you something to do with your hands while you're watching TV or whatever. So there's ways to get around not eating a lot of ultra processed foods, and obviously you don't want to put them in your pantry because if they're in there, you're going to go for it. So I think getting rid of that is definitely one thing that I tell all of my cancer patients. Listen, if you have any ultra processed snack foods in your pantry, you really need to totally get rid of those, because that's probably one of the worst things for cancer.
Does that include protein bars, even ones that are, purporting to be cleanly made and wonderfully made and everything? Obviously, they are processed.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of foods that are processed. Like when I'm on a trip, for example, with my wife, we're on the road. We have a place down in Florida, and we drove down there a couple times. We fly now, thank God. But when we would go down there, when I would go into a gas station, I don't know if you've ever seen those Kind bars. Like there's a lot of nuts in there. I don't have a problem with that. There's a lot of whole foods in there. Nuts are extremely healthy for you. And believe it or not, if we need to eat lunch, we'll stop at Burger King and get one of those Impossible Burgers. Now, I will tell you that an Impossible Burger is not as healthy as a bean burger, but they've done studies where they've compared bean burgers to Impossible Burgers to a regular hamburger and its effect on cardiovascular risk, lipid profiles, and they find that the Impossible Burger is not as bad as the hamburger, but it's not as good as the bean burger, for example. So,
You said before that in the US, we tend to go like the guy with the steak and the 6 eggs. I remember seeing a beer commercial from Australia. The beer's name is Foster.
Okay.
And here is how proud they are
Oh yeah.
of their toughness.
Yeah.
They show a 24-ounce steak, really big, and on the steak was a tiny bit of green garnish, like maybe a 5 millimeters. And then the announcer says, Australian for salad. And then they show the beer and they say, Australian for beer. But it was all very
Oh,
proud
that's
about the.
amazing. When you mentioned that about putting the little bit of green garnish on the steak, I give a lecture. In fact, I just gave one about 2 weeks ago to Wellness Expo. And and I don't know if you know what an ORAC unit is. An ORAC unit is the measure of how the food's ability to neutralize free radicals. And essentially, I have a whole day of eating a whole food, a standard American diet. So it's basically, bacon and eggs in the morning, and then a Big Mac for lunch, and then in the evening it was a steak, and there was a little bit of parsley on it to give them a little bit more ORAC units. So for the whole day, that person ate only 44 ORAC units. Then I show to the left, I show one sweet potato with a teaspoon of cinnamon and a pinch of clove. And clove is the most potent antioxidant herb on the face of the earth. Just that one food was 246 ORAC units, just that one food. Then the next slide, I showed 5 different standard American breakfasts, and they were anywhere from 5 to 25 ORAC units. And then I showed one smoothie with a bunch of berries and so forth in it, and also some amla powder. Amla is Indian gooseberry. It's the most potent antioxidant fruit on the face of the earth. Just that one smoothie had 1,500 ORAC units compared to those other breakfasts that were like 5 to 25 ORAC units. And once again, neutralizing free radical activity, which keeps your DNA mutations down, which is going to help you age better. And if you have cancer, you definitely don't want to be getting additional DNA mutations because you're definitely going to go into relapse if you get to a certain number. So,
Before we leave the proteins and go to juices or shakes, I want to ask you about what do you think about eggs as a food?
yeah, I don't do any eggs at all. And I'll tell you one reason is that one egg has about 200 milligrams of cholesterol. Now, I will tell you that cholesterol doesn't affect your lipid profile as badly as saturated fat. I mean, your body has a way of kind of controlling the amount of cholesterol that's actually absorbed into your body. In your enterocytes, you have these Niemann Pick receptors that basically will actually receive the cholesterol. And if it does receive it, you also have these ATP binding transport proteins that will actually kick it out. So it might get into the enterocyte, and these ATP binding transporters might say, okay, we're going to get the hell out of here. We don't need any more cholesterol. So as far as cholesterol getting into your blood, not all of it gets into your blood when you eat it. And studies do show that when you eat more and more cholesterol, your cholesterol levels will definitely go up, but not as much as the way that saturated fat affects your cholesterol. But there's 2 large studies that were done that looked at cholesterol intake and its relationship with cancer. Um, they both followed these people for about 14 years. They both, interestingly, had 1.2 million participants. And what they found was that blood cholesterol levels were directly correlated with just about every type of cancer. So the higher the cholesterol level, the higher the cancer. And there's a couple other studies that I've posted on my Instagram site, uh, for instance, with pancreatic cancer. For every 100 milligram increase in cholesterol, pancreatic cancer goes up about 8% for every 100 milligram increase in cholesterol. For endometrial cancer, it goes up about 6%. So cholesterol is definitely correlated with cancer. And we do know that cancer cells, as they're growing, I mean, they suck in cholesterol like it's going out of style. I mean, they have tons of LDL receptors on their cellular membrane, and they do feed on cholesterol, especially breast cancer, colon cancer, and prostate cancer. And with prostate cancer, there is a definite correlation between egg consumption and prostate cancer. I mean, anytime I'm counseling people with prostate cancer, I tell them, listen, don't eat any eggs. I mean, just totally eliminate them, because there is a lot of research showing there's a direct correlation between egg consumption and prostate cancer. So one of the other things with eggs is they have very high choline levels. And if you remember when I was talking about Joe Mercola's, eating all those eggs in a steak, I told you he was eating high carnitine. Carnitine is very high in steak, cheese, and shellfish, and choline is very high in eggs. And what studies show is that when the gut bacteria are exposed to high choline and high carnitine levels, there's a bacteria called Hungetella. It's one of the pathogenic bacteria. We basically have about 1,000 different subspecies of bacteria in our gut. You basically have good Prevotella bacteria and 500 subspecies, and you have about 500 plus pathogenic bacteria. And we really want the good bacteria to be outweighing the pathogenic bacteria to kind of keep them under control. But when you eat a lot of carnitine or choline, which is in eggs, this Hungetella bacteria, which is one of the pathogenic bacteria, I mean, it starts dividing, proliferating at a very aggressive rate. And what it does, it actually converts the carnitine or choline into what's called TMA, trimethylamine. Trimethylamine then goes to the liver. It's converted to trimethylamine oxide. And this work has been done at the Cleveland Clinic. And they show that high TMAO levels will increase your chances of getting cardiovascular events, type 2 diabetes, dementia, really all-cause mortality. And there was actually a recent study that came out that was interesting. It was like if you present to the ER with chest pain, if they measure your TMAO levels, they can actually predict whether or not you're going to have a heart attack within 30 days of presenting to the ER with chest pain. So these gut bacteria can create these very detrimental chemicals when exposed to high choline, which is in egg products, and also the high carnitine, which is in a lot of your red meats and so forth. So that's another aspect that you really have to think about when you're eating animal products.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.